Well, welcome to Air and Space. We're going to do something a little different than what you're used to, I think. You can see we have an array of maps, and we're going to talk about Pearl Harbor and the Japanese attack. Yesterday was the 75th anniversary of the attack. How many know anything about Pearl Harbor? Angel, what you got? Bravo, Angel, bravo.
Do you? Please have much for us.
No,
Ankle.
no, please.
Well,
Space pressing at an angle.
Okay.
Well, the thing to remember is that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. Now, stop and think about that for a minute. Radar was just brand new and freaking huge. It was, the radar station on Hawaii was only in operations 3 hours a day because nobody believed in the technology yet. So, you think radar, forget it. Satellites, nope, that doesn't happen for another 20, 30 years. That doesn't happen until 68, 69 time frame. So there is no reconnaissance satellites, there is no nothing. Large fleets of 27, 28 ships, in this case 6 aircraft carriers, can sneak up on the island of Hawaii and nobody noticed. Nobody ever saw them. So you got to think about that. You got to think about the technology in the aircraft. Everything is iron sights, they called it. There is no computer control, there is no lock-on, there is no missile, there is nothing like that. It's the point the nose of your airplane at the target and hope you hit it. There's no computer telling you when to drop the torpedo. The technology, even GPS, things like GPS and navigation, it was done by these charts. One of the aircraft that we're going to discuss actually has 3 people in it. It has somebody to run the torpedo and the weapon system, and the guy fly the plane, and one guy in the back, and his job was to navigate off of these charts and use the compass, just like we do out in the woods, ground team. No GPS or compass or map, and that's it. Which, if you stop and think about how much ocean you see on that chart there's no landmarks. Those charts are modern, so there's a lot of things on there like buoys and things like that just didn't exist. So that's kind of the mindset that we've got to start this discussion with. I call it our grandparents' 9/11. That's something I came up with just because it really was. They lost just about 2,500 people during the attack. 1,175 on the USS Arizona alone when that battleship went down and exploded. You talk about respect for veterans, there you are. So let's kind of set the scene a little bit. If I turn this on and make it work. All right. So to get an idea of what's going on, we have to go back a little bit farther. So back in 1931, the Japanese invade Manchuria, which on that map right there is right in that neck of the woods. You guys see where that is. They invaded in order to protect Japanese citizens from Chinese terrorism, essentially. They didn't use the word terrorism, but essentially what it was. They were saying that the Chinese were taking retribution on Japanese citizens, so they went into Manchuria to protect their own. What they were really doing was looking for natural resources. Japan is an island. There's only so much of stuff. So they were looking for all kinds of different minerals and things like that. They wanted to create this greater East Asia prosperity sphere. Fancy word for empire. Japan is ruled by an emperor, and that emperor was God, as far as the Japanese people were concerned. That was, it wasn't oh look, he's our president. No, he is the emperor because he is a god, and the other gods have chosen him. So they would do whatever he said. And the funny part is that a lot of the government used his name in order to make things happen, that some of it he didn't know about. 1937, a few years later, they take over, they go for China as a whole. They move out of Manchuria, not blind Dulworth. Anyway. So they go in there and they start moving westward across China. As you can see from the map, by 1941, they're not doing so well. So in 1937, they start the invasion. 1941, they've only got the areas in yellow. They went in because China was having a civil war between the communists. If you guys have ever heard of the word Mao, this is where he came from. And the communists had the little pockets of resistance, the nationalists had the rest of the country, and it was a catfight. I mean, it was just fought to a stalemate. The Allies provided aid, military packages. Anybody heard of the Flying Tigers? Okay. That's what it is, was volunteer servicemen that went over to aid them. One that you're going to learn a lot about was also Major Carlson. If you don't know that name, you will.
I think we started an encampment, possibly.
Wouldn't surprise me. He went over to be an advisor to the Chinese military and observe how they fought. And he came back, Marine Corps motto, gun ho. Remember that?
Oh yeah,
You know
yeah.
what
I
that's
watched a
about?
movie on it now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, gung ho is the Japanese or the Chinese way of fighting. It means teamwork and harmony. And Major Carlson went on to create and lead the second. I'm dropping the word now. Raider Battalion.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to spit out. Which created a lot of havoc in a lot of places, in a good way. The U.S. Starts imposing sanctions. We all hear that word today, and back then it was even more so. Ladies, the Japanese are the ones that came up with pantyhose. Guys, the Japanese are the ones that came up with plastic for sunglasses. They were the first ones to make sunglasses, and they were importing that stuff into the U.S. There was other stuff too, like silk and things like that, but what we started to do was we started requiring a license to sell. And essentially that went to, you can sell your product here, but you have to pay a fee to do it. And the Japanese didn't care for that very much because that makes prices go up for their merchandise, and as a result, remember we're talking about 1937, anybody remember what's happening in America in 37?
Great Depression.
Exactly. So, nice expensive silk pantyhose? We're not buying that. The U.S. also decided to seize Japanese assets. There used to be the Bank of Yokohama in New York back in that time. The Japanese yen was fairly worthless around the world. So what happened was they would go ahead and they would convert the yen into dollars at the Bank of Yokohama in New York. And then they would use the dollars to buy materials they needed, resources, war materials essentially, but metals, oil, things like that. So when the U.S. government seized that, that was a big deal. Now mind you, I mean, we're aggravating Japan at this point. You know, we want them out of China is what we're trying to do. The straw that broke the camel's back was when we stopped selling them oil. You got a war going on. You know, look at it from a Japanese perspective. We've got a war going on. Wars are expensive. Wars take a lot of oil. Well, wait a minute. That's why we went in here in the first place, was to get oil. And it ain't working out so well. Now my biggest supplier just cut us off. So now what are we going to do? Across the pond, 1939, Germans start moving on Poland. And this comes into play, but the big thing is now we're worried about Japan in the U.S., but we don't think they're going to do anything. Germans have started this, and as we move into 1940, Lend-Lease comes into play, where we start shipping aid into Britain. So now we're sending stuff to China, and we're sending stuff to Britain. Still no truce. 1940, Japan aligns itself with Germany and Italy in the Tripartite Act. It really didn't do anything for them. Hitler promised aid and all this to Japan in order to help fight the US, and it never materialized. 1940, we're still looking for oil, tin, and rubber basically at this point to continue the war. So what looks really interesting is French Indochina, which is on the map there is the big map in front of Dulsworth with Vietnam, Malaya. Am I still blinding you?
Littleworth. Littleworth was a good one.
There's some place called.
So, but the problem that the Japanese had is they felt at this point that the U.S. had about enough of them, and if they went into a French colony, because French had already was in the process of falling at that point to the Germans, that the U.S. would come to the rescue. And actually, that was a very bad assumption. Actually, we probably would have left them alone. But this man, Admiral Yamamoto, who's commander of the Combined Fleet, he was one of the few. You guys know the story of Billy Mitchell, right? He was the general who's like, we can take aircraft and sink ships. We can make this happen. And the U.S. started to buy into it. It came out with the Navy came out with the USS Langley as a training ship to launch biplanes off of and to see if it could happen. Well, this is Japan's Billy Mitchell. He really believed in air power, and he was in a position to actually make it happen. And that's what, in 1940, he started training the 1st Carrier Division, which was 6 Japanese aircraft carriers. They started getting in Zero fighters, which we'll cover in a minute, but they were brand new and state-of-the-art, made by Mitsubishi.
Cool.
Yeah, the Japanese history, you find a Toyota and a lot of different names.
Yeah,
They made a lot of things you didn't think of.
World War II Japanese POWs actually they had a Toyota for a while.
Nice.
He was infantry though, so.
Yeah, well, he's grown. The big thing about Yamamoto is he fought very hard against the general headquarters and the prime minister. He didn't want war with the U.S. because he was U.S. educated, so he lived here for a while. And he knew what our capabilities were as far as production. And he started looking at that. He didn't. The original plan for the Japanese, and this failed to happen, but the original plan was a decisive strike at Pearl Harbor in order to knock out the Pacific Fleet, which did happen. The invasion of Indochina to get the resources, and then they were going to turn around to the U.S. and start peace negotiations. That was the plan. The problem is the war went too well, and they got, some historians refer to it as victory disease. Hey, this is going so well, why don't we keep going? And that's the point where the U.S. production started ramping up, and by the time the invasion of Saipan came around, we had 700 ships off that island blowing the living daylights out of it. Yeah, you should have said something sooner. So he wanted a decisive strike against the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. His inspiration was actually the British at Toronto, I never pronounce it. Tarantino. I'm going to try it again. But what was interesting was this city is located in the boot of Italy. And the British took the HMS Illustrious, one of their aircraft carriers, and conducted a torpedo attack of the Italian fleet in the harbor there, and was very successful. You guys ready for a laugh? High tech here, advanced stuff, right? You ready? You ready? There it is. 24 biplanes with torpedoes.
That's it?
That's it. That's it. Toronto is the term I was looking for. They came in 2 waves, got the 2 cruisers over in the bay, came down, all the ships in white were damaged, and then they had a second wave that came in and hit them from a different direction. Like I said, high tech. You know, and you start thinking about CAP airplanes that, you know, are the guys holding out the bomb out the window of the Piper Cub going after the German sub. We were state of the art too. So the fleet sails, 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers, 8 tankers, and 350 aircraft. This is the first time in history that 6 aircraft carriers or that more than 1 aircraft carrier worked together. That never happened before. The US, British, none of us did it. We always had the aircraft carriers were independent groups, went to different locations. Never ever had we worked together. And we learned from this. So we get into, want to talk about the aircraft real quick. There we go. The B-5N2 torpedo bomber, better known as Kate. So this guy had one trick pony. Had a 1 torpedo on it. And you can see the rest of the specs there, your crew of 3. You could also take the torpedoes off and put 2 100-pound bombs. Now, if you stop and think of today's standard, the smallest bomb we have in the inventory is 500 pounds. So it's like throwing a hand grenade. And look at the maximum speed there before the engine blows up. 235 mile an hour. We're burning here, aren't we?
My car is.
No, top speed on a car is 279.
So here's a Kate that's actually still flying today. And you can see the torpedo and how that sits. And that mount extends downward. Any idea why? Come on, it's real simple. Think about it.
So it hits the water and travels possibly.
Yeah, so it hits the water and doesn't clip your propeller on the way out. Little details. Yeah, well, that's exactly it. They had to find this out somehow. Some Japanese pilot at some point had a bad day.
You had a bad day.
So the next one up is the D-3A-1 dive bomber, otherwise known as the VAL. Okay? Who understands what a dive bomber is?
Sounds like a suicide bomber.
Nope. The kamikazes come later. This plane was used for kamikazes later in the war when they started running out of pilots who could actually fly.
The people that were going to fly the kamikaze planes used to drink a ceremonial tea before they would.
Absolutely. Which I never understood either. Why tea and not sake? I'd want to drink before that, but that's just me.
Well, maybe because you'd be like so much if you miss the
If you're gonna go happy.
Yeah.
So I carried the 1 500-pound bomb and 2 100-pounders. So it was the big boy. Of course, this is one that I said that's still flying. But again, it was the same type of thing, that it had a release that swung the bomb down. Now, dive bombing we'll get into in a minute, but the basic idea of dive bombing is exactly what it sounds like. Is you start at about 10,000 feet, you push the nose over to a 75-degree angle, you apply speed brakes, and you go straight down on your target.
Pull the stick into your gut.
That's it. You got it.
That sounds
Yeah.
like it failed many times.
Some people had a bad day. Then we get into the Zero. Now notice the speed here compared to the other 2. That was faster than anything in the U.S. inventory at the time. It could outrun anything. It was light. It was one of the first aircraft that was made out of aluminum and not steel. And it, like I said, we had nothing to match it at that point. You had the 2 20mm cannons in the nose, or in the wings rather, and then I think it was a 7.7 in the cowling. And you can see those there's your 20 millimeter. And then up in the county, you can't see it so well here, but there's two, the two 7.5
How did that
millimeter.
destroy the propeller when they shot that?
World War I technology. Believe it or not, there is a timing chain that goes between the machine gun and the propeller. And that's how the old biplanes would not shoot their propeller off. It would time it so that the blades would be like that when the gun fired. And it was all automated, believe it or not.
Wow.
With everything we've seen so far, it's actually automated.
How, I just like wonder if that ever failed and like it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Somebody had a bad day.
Just, yeah.
You got it.